Hello, dear friends. This past Shabbat, which just ended a few hours ago, was Shabbat Zachor, which literally means the Sabbath of remembrance. And we just started the first chapter, the first parasha portion of the book of Vayikra, Leviticus. But as it's Shabbat Zachor, it takes there's an additional reading where we read from the book of Deuteronomy, Devarim, the story of the attack of Amalek on the Israelite nation when we left Egypt, which is found in two places in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses. The 2 places, of course, are in the book of Shemot, Exodus 17, which tells the story of where the Israelite nation was attacked by Amalek upon leaving Egypt, and they fought back and were able to overcome when Moses really prayed to God and lifted his arms. And as long as his arms were lifted, the Israelites were able to prevail. And then it's told again by Moses in the book of Devarim, chapter 25, which of course is his final oration towards the end of the 40 years. Now, there are some interesting things about this story which I want to mention. The first one is, in Exodus, in Shemot, it says at the end, Kiyad al-Kesia, which literally means, for there is a hand on God's throne, which, by the way, in biblical times, putting your hand or raising your hand towards God, or in this sense, putting the hand on God's throne means taking an oath. As, for instance, Abraham said, Harimoti yadi el Hashem Elyon, after he battled the 4 kings, he said, I lift my hand to the highest God, that I will not take anything from the spoils. So when it says, there's a hand on God's throne, Kiyad al-Kesia, which means as if there's an oath, meaning God took an oath. Milchama l'Hashem ba'Amalek midor dor, that there is a battle, God's battle with Amalek from generation to generation. But it said God's battle, it doesn't say the battle of the people of Israel. And when Moses talks about Amalek, when he says, remember what Amalek did to you, he says at the end that you have to delete the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Timchet zecher Amalek mitachad hashamayim. It doesn't even say the Amalek, it says the memory of Amalek has to be removed from the heavens. What does this mean? What is God's battle with Amalek? How do you delete the memory of Amalek? And what is Amalek? The nations that are mentioned in the Bible, each one plays a role, especially in their interface with the Jewish people. The Midianites have a role, and the Ammonites, and the Moabites, and the Edomites, and Amalek. In fact, Amalek is referred to in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, by Bilam. Reshit Goyim Amalek. It's the root of the nations, the head of the nations. There's something about Amalek, which is at the root of all the nations on the earth. Reshit Goyim. Now, where is Amalek to be found in our scripture? So, of course, when the Israelite nation has been subservient to the Egyptians for 210 years, according to our tradition, as slaves, and now they're coming out and they're trying to pull themselves together, and Moses trying to give them an identity, and they come to Sinai and receive the Torah. So they're attacked by Amalek. Amalek doesn't want these tribes to turn into a people. Amalek senses something great is going on here and wants to destroy it before it happens. That's the first time we discover Amalek. Then we discover Amalek again. King Saul, the first king of Israel, in the book of Samuel, is told to attack Amalek. Obviously, Amalek must have hung around if they're nearby, which he does, and he makes a mistake of keeping King Agag alive, and also leaving some of the spoils for the people, specifically the livestock. And Samuel tells him he did a terrible thing. And he is punished and loses his kingship, which is given to David because of that. And then, in a more tragic way, you might say, in the end, when Saul falls in battle and is wounded, there's a young lad there, and he says, please take my sword and kill me, which the boy does. And the boy was from Amalek. And this boy then took that sword and went to David, hoping he would get a prize because he knew that there was tension between David and Saul. And David said, how dare you kill God's anointed one? And he killed that Amaleki young man. So Amalek now is on the second time mentioned, and this time killing the first king of Israel. So, which is very symbolic. They wanted first to destroy the whole Israelite nation as we were just born and came out of Egypt. Now they're trying to kill the first king, which they did, of course. Then we have an interesting thing. The Talmud says to us that the book of Esther and the story of Haman, who is called Haman, the son of Hamdata, the son of Agag. And the Talmud points out Agag is the same name of the king of Amalek. Now, of course, it's generations later. But they make this sort of association between Haman and Amalek. Why? What does it mean? And remember, the book of Esther is much later. It's at the end of the Babylonian exile, at the beginning of the Persian Empire. So what does this all mean? Well, this third one is also interesting. Haman was trying to kill the Jewish people before they go back to the second temple, meaning they're in exile, leave them there, or at least destroy them there. They can't go back again. So you have Amalek trying to destroy the Jewish people, the Israelite people, as they come out of Egypt, an Amalekite killing the first king when we came into the land, and in the Talmudic thinking, another Amalekite who wants to kill the Jewish peoples before they have the ability to go back to the land. Because, by the way, it appears that Cyrus gave the okay just before that, depending exactly how you date the book of Esther, either just before that or just after that. My inkling is that it might be before that, but because he's the first Persian king. But anyhow, so at each time, then Amalek seems to try to pivotal role to stop the nation of Israel of being a sovereign nation in its land. First, to try to kill them so they can, after they leave Egypt, they don't make it to the land. When they make it to the land, to kill their first king, and then to try to destroy them before they make it to the land the second time. Now, there are no more Amaleks around. The Talmud actually tells a story, Jewish people. And I'll read the story to you. So the story goes, and I'm reading it now directly from the Mishnah in Yadayim, chapter 4, Mishnah 4. On that day, Yehuda, Ger Ammoni, which means a Yehuda was a proselyte, a convert from Ammon, the nation of Ammon, came and stood before the study hall. And he said to them, this is in the 2nd century, Mani levo b'kahal, can I marry into the Jewish people? Rabbi Gamliel said no. Rabbi Yeshua said yes. Rabbi Gamliel said no, because doesn't it say in Deuteronomy 23 that an Ammonite and a Moabite shall not enter the assembly of God, even the 10th generation, which by the way means that they can convert, but they cannot marry they're, of course, a male Jewish woman. Remember, the prohibition is to the males and not the females. We learned that in the book of Ruth. And the Talmud points that out. So, that's the question that he asked. This fellow Yehuda, converted, he says, I'm an Ammonite. Can I marry a Jewish woman? Rabbi Yeshua said yes. Because the Ammonites and Moabites are not the same ones that they were in biblical times. Because Sancheriv, the king of Assyria, came and mixed the nations one with another, moved them around from here to there. And therefore, you might be living in it. You might have come from an area that was called once Ammon, but it doesn't necessarily mean you are an Ammonite. So that is true. And even if we were to find somebody theoretically who we thought came from Amalek, they still wouldn't be an Amalekite, according to Rabbi Yeshua. So what is then the meaning of this, of the Amalek? Obviously, there must be also some symbolic meaning. If there's a God's battle with the Amalek in every generation, and not only that, but it says that you have to delete the memory of Amalek. And Amalek is something rooted within the nations. Reshit Goyim, the beginning of nations. What is this? There's something about the understanding that many nations have about the Jews, that sometimes the Jews don't get it. Paro, in the biblical story in Shemot, is the first one to refer to the people of Israel as a people. This people of Israel, this nation of Israel is multiplying, getting exceedingly large. Let's outsmart them, he says in Exodus. And then, of course, he wants to kill the firstborn and enslave them, etc. So Paro is the first one to realize that these tribes are a nation, even before the tribes themselves were able to see that. So the nations of the world are able to see things in the Israelite nation that the Israelites themselves do not see. In the Psalms of David, there is a song called Shir HaMa'alot, the Song of Ascent. Shir HaMa'alot. And in this Song of Ascent, which is the Psalm of Ascent, which is, of course, in Tehillim, the Psalms 126. It says, B'shuv Hashem Shivat Zion, when God returned our exiles to Zion, Hayinu Kochomim, we were like dreamers. And then it goes on to say, Az Yomruva Goyim, at that time, the nations shall say, Higdil Hashem lasotim ele. God has done wonderful things, great things for those people. And then the next verse says, Higdil Hashem lasotim ano yinis mechem. They're right. God did do good things, great things to us. We're very happy. When you examine it closely, it's very interesting. The nations first are saying God has done great things to them. When they look at the people of Israel returning from the exiles to the land of Israel, they're saying, wow, that's amazing. That's awesome. God did great things to that people, bringing them back to their land. And then the people of Israel will turn around and say, they're right. God did do great things for us. There's a statement in the Talmud one says in one place, "En ba'al hanes makir b'niso." A person who had a miracle happen to them doesn't even realize it. But the nations shall realize this. It's the power of being able to see things sometimes from the outside that the people themselves do not see. Amalek, though, who realizes the grandeur of the Israelite nation, wants to cut them down, wants to stop it. Who is this nation who wants to bring us the Torah, the commandments, and ethics? Who needs it? Belief in God. What are they trying to make everybody good? What's wrong with them? Not realists. So they're trying to cut down the people as they leave Egypt. That doesn't work. Knock off the first king who's already wounded. That doesn't work. Let's destroy them before they go back to the second temple. Let's stop the course of history from that happening. In a sense, that's the meaning of anti-Semitism, which is rooted in Amalek. As somebody once said, a nation, the litmus test of a nation is how they treat their Jews. If they're nice to the Jews, they're probably nice to everybody. Now, it's very hard to know why there's anti-Semitism in the world. But whatever it is, it's a problem of hatred. And maybe it's partially out of ignorance and partially out of this and partially out of that, partially out of liking scapegoats and partially of lack of confidence and whatever you want to explain it as. But there's also, as long as the Jewish people have not found their root and their self-identity, there's always going to be an Amalek trying to stop us, but not for the right reasons. And that's what the Torah tells us to remember. Because as Jews, we always like looking at the good of things, and we always like, especially when things seem to be okay, we like feeling confident and faithful in the new surroundings. And we forget that there are evil people around too. Because who wants to think about evil people? So once a year, we have to remind ourselves about Amalek. Now I want to go back to the first story of Amalek in the book of Shemot in Exodus, because it's a very interesting story. It says, "Vayavo Amalek, vayalachem Yisrael b'Refidim," that Amalek comes and fights Israel in Refidim. And then Moses is told by God to choose people and to send Joshua out to fight them. And Aaron and Hur are sitting with Moses. And when Moses raises his hands, the Israelites prevail. But when his hands falls, the Amalek prevails, Amalekites. And so Aaron and Hur held up Moses' hands. And it says in Hebrew, "Vayhi yadav emunah," and his hands were faithful until morning. His hands being held up were called, his hands were faithful until morning. The only way to beat Amalek is for the Israelites to have faith in themselves as a nation and in God's message to mankind, which is the message of how to be human, ethical, and spiritual, to live a life of meaning between man and man and God. And we do believe that anti-Semitism will stop one day. But until that happens, we have to be steadfast in our belief in ourselves, in our belief of the justness of our path, and to know that the more we believe in ourselves, and the more we are determined, the more this will be behind us, and we'll work together with the nations of the world who will understand, or who already many understand our message, which is our message of, as I said, of meaning in life, purpose in life, ethics, morality, and peace. One last thing. And I think this is also an interesting thing. Also in the book of Exodus, it ends off by saying, "Ki yad al kesyan." I mentioned this at the beginning. For the hand, it says, the hand is on the throne of God. Rashi brings a midrash, biblical interpretation. And the midrash says, the word there for kisei, for a chair, is case. The aleph is missing. It's just the kaf and the samach. The aleph is missing. It's referring to a chair as a case instead of kisei. The aleph is missing. And God's name, because it says the chair of God, is Yud-Hey. It's only half of the tetragrammaton, which is Yud-Hey and the Vav-Hey. It's missing the Vav-Hey. There is Yud-Hey in the Bible, but why not mention the whole name? So the Midrash says, and Rashi brings it, the God's throne is not complete, and God's name is not complete until Amalek is removed from this world. What does that mean? What's the difference between the throne and the name? A name, first of all, is the way you're called. It's a relationship. If somebody calls me Rafi, which is my name, Raphael, so they are relating to me. They might not know who I am as an essence, as a person, but that's the interactions between myself and that person. That becomes Rafi for them, or Raphael for them. That's it, how it is with all people. So a name is a relationship. God's name is how God reveals him, her, itself to the world. It's a relationship. It's a connection, because we'll never know the essence of God. El miti damuni vayeshveh. Who can you imagine me and compare me to, says God. Isaiah. So you cannot know the essence, but the relationship between God and the world. That's called the name. And also the throne, the manifestation, the kingship of God in the world. There's the relationship, and there's the success of the relationship. It's called the throne. That's why the temple is sometimes called the throne. Kisei kevod marom merishon mekomi dashenu, as it says in Jeremiah. The kisei kavod, which is the glorious throne of God, kisei kavod marom merishon, the transcendental one, is the place of our temple, mekomi dashenu. Is in Jeremiah 17:2. Yirmiyahu. So the name represents the relationship. The throne represents the ability for God and man to connect together in some type of relationship in this world. Both of these are endangered by Amalek, who is not interested in this happening. Now, it's very interesting that in our tefillah, in our prayer book, right after the recital of the Shema, and before I mention that, what are these letters? The letter, he said, Aleph is missing from the word kisei, and Vav Hey is missing from God's special name, the Tetragrammaton, Shem Amphora. If you put them together, it's Hey Vav Aleph, which spells out the Hebrew word who, him. Hey Vav Aleph. Well, we have in our prayers, in our official prayer book, after the Shema, we say, Ledor Vador, in every generation. Hu Kayam, he is there. Ushmo Kayam, and his name is there. He is there. Hey Vav Aleph is those three letters. Hu Kayam, he is there, the Hey Vav Aleph. Ushmo Kayam, and his name is there. V'chison Achon, and his throne is actually fine and standing erect. And his majesty and his kingdom is always there. Which means, from God's point of view, evil doesn't really exist. But unfortunately, from our point of view, it does. In our world, it does. God's throne and God's name is manifest. But for it to be manifest in our world, we have to eradicate evil, which is called the fight with Amalek. And since there's no more Amalek as people around, it becomes an idea of fighting evil in order for God's name and God's throne to be manifest in this world, which means to rid the world of the forces that try to create decadence in humanity, to destroy us from living the ultimate that we can in our lives as human beings created in the image of God. Because we have this potential, we just have to believe in it and not let others stimulate this by, as I say, trying to create evil and decadence in the world. So this is something I wanted to say about Amalek. And one last idea. Amalek, numerical value, comes out to 240. And this has been mentioned many times, which is the same gematria, the same numerical value as the Hebrew word safek, which means a doubt. And as you remember, it also says that Moses' arms were raised and they were faithful and we prevailed. When you doubt your ability to overcome evil, when humanity and Jewish people and humanity doubt their ability to create a better world, when you have that safek, when you're skeptical and you don't think it's going to happen, when you have a safek that there can be a relationship to God and we can discover the image of God within ourselves, then we're going to lose the battle. But if we believe in ourselves, in our ability to make this manifest in our world and in our lifetimes, then we can win the battle. And this is the message of Amalek. which is a message of a belief in ourselves as the Jewish people, and a belief of mankind in itself, in the goodness of man, and the ability for reason and morality to prevail. Shalom, shalom.